Hello, everyone. Welcome back. This is Rabbi Jeffrey Saks of Atid and the Web Yeshiva with the second of our three-part series on Agnon's Eretz Yisrael, Shai Agnon's treatment of the place of the land of Israel in his writings and in Jewish thought, actually. Hello to my parents. And hello to our friends at Lincoln Square Synagogue. Where are you?
Hi.
There you go. There's Lincoln Square Synagogue. How many people do you have there today?
About eight.
Eight. Oh, that's no good. Okay. And so that's really weird. I'm looking at myself, looking back at myself. Okay. And our sponsors, Lincoln Square Synagogue. And, of course, our thanks to the people here at the Agnon House in Jerusalem. Today's story is, I mentioned at the end of last. Well, first of all, just a technical note. We offered a prize for a little trivia question. Last time I did this little trivia game where every week I asked a question. I asked these really simple questions. They weren't simple questions, but they were simple in the fact that anybody that took the trouble to Google was able immediately to find out the answers. So like as the question was coming out of my mouth, somebody was Googling it and giving the answer. So this time I chose probably a harder one that's definitely not Googleable because I tried it out myself. The question last week was the 40-second, was Agnon's 40-second yard site. And I asked who delivered the hesped, the eulogy, or there were a couple of them, at his funeral here in Jerusalem 42 years and now a week ago. And no one gave the right answer, although some people gave some really good guesses. Some of them were really good guesses. You'd say, oh yeah, that person definitely would have eulogized Agnon, except the person was already dead. And that is the kind of thing that somebody should be able to figure out by Googling. Agnon died in February 1970. So we're extending the question for another week. If anyone can name at least one person who delivered a eulogy for Agnon, you'll win a prize worth, not a lot of money. I've mentioned to you in the past that Agnon wove these tales that were very rich. They were a midrashic weaving of the entire corpus, the entire canon of Jewish literature up to that point, from the Bible through Chazal, the Talmud, the Midrash, the Rishonim, the Achronim, Hasidic tales, Jewish folklore, Kabbalistic literature, and he weaves it all together into this new story. So that, for example, the story that we saw last week, the Maseh Ha'ez, the fable of the goat, in which he's taking a trope out of Jewish folklore, this idea of this magic passage to the land of Israel from the diaspora, and he completely makes it his own by rewriting the story. It's possible to a lesser degree that's what's happening here today. I've compared it in the past to take for example Shakespeare. I'm told that only one of Shakespeare, everybody agrees Shakespeare, he was a pretty good writer. If they were giving out Nobels in the 16th century, he probably would have gotten one. Only one of the plots of his story, of his plays, was, to the best of our knowledge, original, in the sense that we haven't found the earlier source on which he was basing himself. But all of his other plays took ideas that existed in literature, in mythology, in folklore, in other things, and he rewrites the plot. So, for example, Romeo and Juliet. What's Romeo and Juliet about? What? A guy and a girl. Guys and dolls. No, three-word answer, right? If you're in 9th grade English, there's only one right answer. No, well, you're close. Right? Two families at war. Yeah, technically, but what's the phrase that's going to get you the right answer or full credit on the test in 9th grade? Star-crossed love. Star-crossed love. There you go. Sherry got it right. Star-crossed love. But the plot of Romeo and Juliet existed already long before Shakespeare. It was an Italian tale in writing, and the names of the families were Montague and Capulet. And the plot is there. But once Shakespeare gets his hands on that plot and writes Romeo and Juliet, he owns it. So that anybody that wants to write about star-crossed love subsequent to Shakespeare has to first pass through Romeo and Juliet. So West Side Story. Lenny Bernstein wants to write a modern operatic musical about star-crossed love, but setting it on the west side of Manhattan, when the West Side wasn't quite so ritzy as it is now. And he's going to start, it's playing right now, it's playing down the block, right? There's a school production of West Side Story in town right now. So anybody that's going to want to engage in that theme is going to have to do it by first passing through Shakespeare. And that's true very much for Agnon's accomplishment. In many cases, he makes the plots of his stories up, out of whole cloth. But in other cases, he revisits ideas that exist in literature and Jewish literature, and then makes them his own. So Sherry now asks, what was the one play that was original to Shakespeare as far as we know? And I've forgotten. I'm going to say The Merry Wives of Windsor, but I might be wrong. Agnon, however, when he would do this, would very rarely tell you what he was trying to say. His tales are very largely symbolic. So, for example, in our story, and I trust everyone's read the story, these are all very short stories, these 3 stories. So the idea being that everybody be able to have a chance to read them in advance, then now we'll go through them together. So you have two main characters. You have the old man, the Vinegar Maker. What's he a symbol for? Well, maybe Jews in general, but the other guy, what's his name? That guy, that man, Oto Ha'ish, he seems to be pretty clearly a symbol of Christianity. Well, no, he seems to be Jesus, right? That man, Oto Ha'ish, in the Hebrew, Oto Ha'ish is a rabbinic nickname for, how do you call him in Harry Potter? He who shall not be named, right? We don't want to utter his name, the name of that false Messiah. So we call him that man, Oto Ha'ish, and that's what Agnon refers to. So that's a rabbinic, anybody reading Agnon in the Hebrew who's at all familiar with rabbinic literature is going to know that this is a reference to Jesus. I mentioned to you last week that when the story was written, there were people whose shackles went up. Agnon, the great Hebrew author, the great Jewish author, who's taking the entirety of the Jewish canon and distilling it into modern literature, suddenly he's writing a story about Jesus, and Jesus is kind of the hero of the story? What's going on? So, well, let's save judgment on whether Jesus is the hero or not until the end. Right? No, within the story, right? The character at the end who brings him up to Israel. Well, so it's a statue, but it's a statue that somehow performs something, does some action at the end of the story, if in fact that's what it is. But let's hold off on that until we get there. So people said he was attacked. There were newspaper articles. So Agnon said, that's not what I meant. Right? In other words, I never. That's you got the story wrong. But he very rarely would explain to you what the story was really about. There's one famous exception in which Agnon gave a very detailed analysis of what his story was. It's actually an amusing story. People would ask Agnon, "What did you mean by that?" Or they would ask Agnon. Remember, Agnon was one of the most throughout the 40s, 50s, 60s. Agnon was among the most famous people in the state of Israel. He was probably the most significant man of letters in Eretz Yisrael. And you know how it is. I mean, those of you that live here know that anything happens, you turn on the radio and there's this author talking about this, and there's that poet talking about this strike, and there's this artist telling you his opinions about this matter or the other. We're Jews. We like to have opinions. So if you're somebody that has a platform, you like to express yourself. So people would ask Agnon, what do you think about this? What do you think about that? What do you think about politics? What do you think about the matters of the day? And he would say, oh, I wrote a story about that. And they'd say, which story? And he'd say, I forgot. In one case, his granddaughter, this must have been when Agnon was already a little bit older. Agnon has a granddaughter who lives in Efrat, out by us. So when she was a girl in school, in the days when they learned more Agnon, they still do. Agnon is still on the curriculum, but in the days when they learned them a little more thoroughly, Agnon has a story, Shvuat Emunim, in English translated as betrothed. So she was in high school. She had to read. It's a novella. She had an assignment. So she comes home from school, and maybe she was here. She came to see her Saba, and she says, oh, I have this homework to do on this story. So he says, let me see it. So he says, all right, write down what I tell you. She got a C. So Agnon wasn't always even good interpreter of his own works. But he would rarely do this. He would rarely explain to you what the story was really about. Right. Yeah. So and that people would ask. They'd ask him what Yeah. No, so they'd ask him, what does the story mean? He'd say, go ask Professor Kurzweil, or go ask Dov Sedan, go ask the critics that were writing. He wasn't interested. There's another story of him in the 50s already. He started becoming a subject of real academic literary criticism. And there'd be conferences at the Hebrew University, and then later at Bar Ilan, and he'd go and he'd sit in the back and he'd giggle at the things people were saying. Now, he may have been doing that just to annoy them. Agnon's relationship with academics is a different topic. In all cases, in one time he did kind of engage in this. There's a volume, an important volume called Me'atzmi El Atzmi. It's Agnon's nonfiction writings. It's letters, it's speeches that he gave, it's eulogies that he gave for other people, or tributes that he said to other people, interviews that he may have given on the radio, which he occasionally did, things like that. This is a little piece that he wrote about the Hebrew language, which was a topic that very, very, very much engaged him. We've spoken about it in the past. We'll talk about it again in the story that we do next week. And he's talking about the Hebrew language, but he gets a little off track. And he says, he's talking about the early 20th century, the late 19th century. In those days, Herzl's star rose and enlightened the entire diaspora. Like wandering sheep, the Jewish people were like a shepherdless flock. I'm loosely translating what he says here. Herzl came and he united the people to be one people, and gave them the desire to want to return to the land of their inheritance and to dwell in it. Achar kama shanim ba hachrazat Balfour. A few years later came the Balfour Declaration in 1917. Now, I mentioned to you that, if you're unclear on what Balfour Declaration is, so shame on you, and, take a little trip to the Wikipedia. But just remember the Balfour Declaration, here it is. This is the actual Balfour Declaration. And that's actual Balfour. Balfour was the Foreign Secretary of England in 1917. He'd previously served a very brief term as Prime Minister. And in a letter addressed to Lord Rothschild as the head of the Jewish Zionist Federation, he expresses His Majesty's government view with favor the establishment of Palestine as a political home for the Jewish people. It was a tremendous accomplishment in the realm of political Zionism. That England, which then, of course, held the mandate over Palestine after World War I, This is before, but at this point already it was clear that England was going to be victorious. The Ottoman Empire was broken up. After World War I, England gets the protectorate over this part of the world and is in control of Palestine. And England says we look with favor at the ultimate establishment of a Jewish state, a Jewish homeland in the land of Israel. 1917, it's before anyone has ever heard of Hitler. It's before Holocaust. It's before... And this was viewed as the Geula, the redemption, messianic times. We were going to be returning to, we were going to have Jewish, not just that we could live in Israel under foreign rule, but that we would be sovereign in Israel. So Agnon, writing in this letter that he's writing here, is written, I think, in the 60s. He says, so along came the Balfour Declaration. Because of the people that erred and thought that Balfour was the beginning of the redemption, I'm not going to say anything critical of it. It's my true opinion on the Balfour Declaration, I tucked away, I hid away in a little story I wrote. What story was that? It's the story we're reading today. In an interview that that Gershom Scholem gave after Agnon had died, there was this interview. It's actually being shown tomorrow night. Anybody that's interested, at the National Library this week, there's some kind of, it's the 30th anniversary, I think, of Gershom Scholem's death. So this week they're having this celebration, this conference. Tomorrow night they're showing a film of this interview that Gershom Scholem did, in which Dan Miron interviewed Scholem about Agnon. Scholem and Agnon were very close friends. Scholem was about 10 years younger than Agnon. Scholem wrote a number of important pieces on Agnon. If anybody's interested, I'd be happy to email them to you, PDFs of these pieces that Scholem wrote about Agnon. But this is an example of what he thought was Agnon trying to round some corners on his memory. But here he identifies that this story about the Balfour Declaration, Agnon identified as Maglei Tzedek. This story itself, The Paths of Righteousness, was written in 1923, during the period when Agnon himself had gone back to Germany. It was published in, it's almost goosebumpy to think about it. It was published in Germany in 1923. It was published in Berlin. There was a journal called Ha'olam, which is a publication of the World Zionist Organization, the WZO. The Hebrew title is Ma'aglei Tzedek, The Paths of Righteousness. The English translator gave it the subtitle, or the Vinegar Maker, which is what it's about, because I guess the literal translation is a little vague. Ma'aglei Tzedek is what? What's the resonance? What's the reference? Psalms 23. Psalms 23. There you go. Right? Mizmor David Hashem Roi Lo Echsar. Song that the Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. He causes me to lie down in green pastures, leads me beside still waters. He restores my soul. He leads me in the paths of righteousness. Right? B'maglei tzedek l'man shemo. Gam nafshi yeshove v'yancheni b'maglei tzedek l'man shemo. Gam ki elech begei tzalmovet. Even if I'm walking in the shadow of death, lo irara, I will not fear evil. So the Maglei Tzedek, the paths of righteousness, we're talking about as somebody who's here in the shadow of death, and our character in the story is surely that. It's a social satire. What the object of the satire is, we'll have to decide when we finished going through it. But if the Vinegar Maker is a symbol for something, it's a little unclear, but it seems to be that he represents the Jews. And Oto Ha'ish, that man, is somehow a symbol of Christianity in general, the church in specific, or maybe specifically the figure of Jesus himself. So the story itself has to be read as some kind of metaphor for Jewish-Christian relations. In one of the towns of Poland, this story appears in the same collection as the Maseh Ha'ez, right? And both of them they're written around the same time. This story comes first, actually, by a year or two. Both of them, of course, about the connection between a Jew living in Poland and the land of Israel, and the attempt to get there. In one of the towns of Poland, there lived an old man who used to make vinegar. His forebears were renowned wine merchants, but hard times had ravaged him, and they left him with no more than a shack and wine that had gone sour. Now, right away, we have a Talmudic reference. The Talmud, which, again, if you're reading in English, it's not going to completely be lost on you the way that Mashiach last week. If you're reading in translation, no matter, you could know the entire Talmud backwards and forwards, you just won't get the reference in translation. Here, even in translation, you might catch it if you happen to know the reference. The Talmud has this kind of pithy expression, chometz ben yayin, vinegar, the son of wine. That's what we call red wine vinegar. Like if you go into your cabinet here in Israel, you take out the red wine vinegar, it's called chometz ben yayin, right? Meaning it's vinegar now, but it's the descendant that used to be wine. What's vinegar? Vinegar is you take, well, no, it depends. It could be anything. Right. So you take wine and the acidic acid, how does it work? Ethanol oxidizes to acetic acid. Thank you, Jay. And it turns into vinegar. So it's basically wine that's gone bad. It's wine that's gone bad, but it's still usable as vinegar. Now, in the days of old, vinegar wasn't just something you put on your salad. Vinegar was used. It was like, you didn't have Clorox, and you didn't have Ajax, and you didn't have Windex, and you didn't have. Right, it's better than it was. Right? Vinegar had, many household uses. People, you had a vinegar maker. He'd go around town dispensing his vinegar, like Tevye went around town dispensing his milk. Now, this was his job. But the idea of chometz ben yayin is a Talmudic metaphor for a son who's gone off the path. His forebears were wine; they were noble, and he's kind of gone sour, gone off. His wife died when his children were small, and they grew up and were pressed into military service and died in the wars. So he's all alone. He's got no wife. He's got no children. The old man would sit there all alone and make vinegar. For the first 5 days of the week, he would engage in his trade. On Fridays, he'd fill up a large can and make his rounds about town. The can probably looked something like this, maybe a little bit bigger. Right? Can you all see it? Right. I hope you can see it on the screen. Something like this, a little tin or metal can. And he'd make his vinegar, and he'd go around, and he didn't sell it in bottles. He'd come to your house, he'd knock on your shutter, you'd put your jar or your bottle out, and he'd pour you a portion, and you'd pay him a penny for it. Many times he'd stop and think, what am I and what is my life? 5 days a week I make vinegar to sell. When I've sold it, I make some more and go out and sell it again. For what reason? To sustain this enfeebled body. L'farneset haguf hanaguf hazeh. The Hebrew is very poetic here. It's very alliterative. And for what reason? Now that my wife is dead and my children are no more, why do I take such pains to draw my skin from my flesh? He would whine and sigh and moan about the course of his life so much that his work was discreditable in his eyes. Shenifsala, right? His whole life became pasul, invalid, worthless. And even the wearing of tzitzit and tefillin of little worth. We're talking about a traditional religious society, and even the performance of mitzvot became worthless to him because his life, he was so downtrodden, he was so beat. But, however, since the love of the land of Israel was embedded in his heart, he made up in his mind to go up to the land of Israel. And if he were found worthy, he would find for himself a grave in its dust. So right away, the one thing keeping him alive is the thought of death. But right away, the irony is it's on the first page. Right? The one idea keeping him alive is death. But not any death, death in the land of Israel, which after all is and was a Jewish value. Not only was he sparing in his food and parsimonious in his pleasure, he'd even deny himself tasting the fruit from which he had to make a vinegar. Right? He starts pinching his pennies so he can save up to get to the land of Israel, but not to live there, so that he can die there and be buried in the earth of Israel. There's a lot of repetition in the story, right? Again and again and again we're told 5 days a week he makes his vinegar, on Friday he goes out and sells, and then he starts it all over again. Again and again and again, this idea of the repetition. Later we'll see with the money he collects the money, half he gives for his meager upkeep and half he puts, well, wherever he puts it, again and again and again. His life of ongoing monotonous repetition as he's getting older and weaker and more decrepit, all with the idea that, he's got to keep going so he can get around to dying. He'd sit in a stone, take the money out of his pocket, half of which he would take for sustenance, the money that he collects, and the other half he would put into a charity box, which the Gentiles in this realm used to place at crossroads in the hands of that man. So at a fork in the road, there's a statue. There's a stone statue of that man, and in his hands is a charity box. I tried to find a picture of such a thing online. I couldn't, but you can easily imagine what this looked like. No doubt there was a cross. And it was a pushka, but it was a pushka, it was a stucco box for the church. And you'd come to the cross in the road, and you'd stick your pennies into this charity box. A simple man, he was tamim. He didn't know what the purpose of the box was, and he thought that there was no place safer than that. He's this very, very innocent, naive, tamim fellow. So he's putting his money in the church's charity box. It's not just the church's charity box, it's a charity box in the hands of a statue of that man himself, of Jesus himself. He has no idea what this statue is, right? And he figures it's just a safe place for him to store his money, because there was a lock on it. And he'll use it as his piggy bank. Complete naivete. Copper coins he'd take for his immediate requirements, silver coins as traveling expenses to the land of Israel. He'd make a scratch on the can for a sign, right? And he kept a kind of ledger on the can. Every time he'd put a certain amount into this box, he would scratch away on the can, and that's how he was able to keep track of his savings. No, it's a communal box. It's out there on a crossroads. But he figures it looks like a safe place. He's extraordinarily naive. Lo and behold, from then on he labored with joy, because finally he's being able to put his plan in action. I'm taking a practical step to save up money to be able to go up to the land of Israel. Lo and behold, he would say to himself, up to now I disliked my trade, and now I find it hard to give it up. The same utensils and vinegar, and before I know it, the day is done. At midnight, he'd get up from his bed and take his can. Now, the can in Hebrew, hold on a second here. The can in Hebrew is ketone. That's the name for something that more or less looks like this. Some have pointed out that ketone is also if you mix up the letters, also spells tikkun, repair. Tikkun olam, right? To repair the world. Tikkun, to repair his wretched situation. Tikkun, to repair, to fix the broken life that he leads in Poland, which can be repaired by going to Eretz Yisrael. So maybe Agnon is trying to make this kind of association by choosing the term ketone for the can, for the jug. What? Here, ketone. It's on this. Can you see it on the screen here? Kuf Yud Taf Vav Nun. At midnight, he would get up from his bed, take this can, and dance about it with until it was time for morning prayers. Now, immediately we think, well, at midnight he gets up to do something. He's got this little ritual that he does. What's the ritual that we do at midnight? So there's a a well-known but little practiced Jewish prayer called Tikkun Chatzot. Tikkun Chatzot is a prayer instituted by the medieval Kabbalists, meant to be recited at midnight. And there are people who do this. If you go to the Kotel any night of the week, you can see people reciting this at whenever midnight. Midnight doesn't mean 12 o'clock. It means whenever the halachic midnight is, the literal midpoint between sunset and sunrise. And it's a prayer to be recited, weeping and wailing over the destruction of the Holy Temple, over the Beit HaMikdash, and in the hopes of redemption, return to the rebuilt land of Israel. So this guy gets up with his Kiton, Tikkun, at Chatzot, at midnight. It's Kiton Chatzot, not Tikkun Chatzot, right? And instead of sitting and weeping and wailing on the floor, it's like Tisha B'Av. It's a short little thing, this Tikkun Chatzot. But it's like a mini Tisha B'Av every night. The people that have this practice of reciting this prayer, you sit on the floor, you recite prayers that sound a lot like the things we say on Tisha B'Av. At midnight, he'd get up from his bed, take his can, and dance about with it until it was time for morning prayers. So it's the exact opposite. His tikkun, the kiton, is, I hope you can hear that online, he's filling it up, his box, penny to penny, so that he can go up to the land of Israel. The more he was occupied with his calculations of how many scratches there were in the can and how much money he had put in it, in the charity box, so his prayers suffered, becoming somewhat erratic, right? And his whole religious life becomes fixated on getting the scratches up to the tippy top, up to, you know, like when you have that fundraising thing and they have that thermometer and, you know, they mark it red so you get to the top, you know, just a little bit more and we can build that addition to the shul or whatever it is. Right, so just a little bit more, we'll fill up the ketone, the scratches will get to the top, and that's how he'll know that there's enough money in the charity box and he can make his voyage. So he becomes lax with all of his other observances. He becomes lax with all of his other mitzvot. His prayers suffered. And he says, oh God, it's plain for you to see that all the calculations I make are only so that I may go up to your land. Take me there, and I'll say you a fine prayer, Tefillah No'ah. So his entire ritual life, it takes on this whole very egotistical mode to it. Right? You bring me up to the land of Israel, there I'll daven a nice prayer for you. Well, several years pass, the story tells us, where he's scrimping and saving. Perhaps his ketone was a little bit bigger than this. Several years have passed. The inner walls of his house begin to peel. There's this description of everything is like falling apart. The paint is peeling off, the walls are peeling off, the roof begins to leak, cracks appear in the walls. Everything is falling apart. The house, the walls. Later we'll see his palace is falling apart. His body is falling apart. Ultimately, the jug itself. Only God's mercy is keeping him alive and not letting him perish abroad. At cockcrow in the morning, cock-a-doodle-doo, the old man would wash his hands and eyes, light the candle, and sit by the front door and wrap himself up as one who mourns and bewails the exile. The exact opposite. At midnight, he's dancing and singing with his kiton tikkun, when you're supposed to be sitting and mourning. But in the morning, when you're supposed to get up and go and daven and start your day and get going and support yourself, whatever, then suddenly he's sitting on the floor mourning and weeping and wailing. It's the exact... It's 180 degrees, the exact opposite of what he's supposed to be doing. He was dancing on it. But as soon as he sees his can and how many scratches there are on it, he recalls immediately the money he had put in the charity box for his traveling expenses. He'd pick up the can and drum on it with his fingers in song and praises, and then placing one hand on his hip and raising one shoulder, he'd count how many scratches there were on the can. 2, 3, 4, 50, 100, dancing for joy. Not like one who dances over their heads and not like those who, if they're put in one corner, are to be found in another, but like those who dance around their shoulders, moving their shoulders, etc., etc. They come to bring him to davening. he says, he gets to his feet and take with him his talus and tefillin. How tattered was his talus, virtually disintegrating with tears. Thank God he's going to Jerusalem, where one is buried without a talus. This is a strange idea to most people, certainly for those of us coming from the diaspora. Most of us are familiar with the idea that a Jew, when he dies, is buried with his talus, and that's a really fairly universal custom, except it happens not to be the custom in Jerusalem. It happens not to be the custom in Jerusalem. The burial customs in Jerusalem are based on very many Kabbalistic practices. And if anybody has ever been to a funeral in Jerusalem or in Beit Shemesh, where they follow the Jerusalem practices, sometimes you see some things that are a little unusual certainly for those of you that have come from America. And one of the practices that Jews are not buried here with their talus. So he says, oh, my talus is falling apart. It's literally crumbling like tissue paper in my hands, but that's okay because I'm going up to Jerusalem and I don't need it. Because what does a Jew need a talus for? You need a talus to be buried in. But I don't even need that because I'm going up to Israel. And I'm going up to Israel in order to die. So I don't need that talus anymore. When prayers were over, he'd dip a slice of bread into a glass of weak brew. Again, 5 days a week he made vinegar. Fridays he'd fill up again the repetition. Let's skip ahead a little bit to the top of page 206. He thrust his finger through the cobwebs that had gathered during the week around the slit in the charity box. It's interesting. Apparently he's the only one that's putting money in this box. So but it's less morally ambiguous. Because in the end, when he takes his money out, it really is only his money. No one else has been putting money in this box. And he put the coins in the box. He was a simple man, and he knew not the purpose for which the box served. Each time he put coins in the box, he'd add another scratch to the can for a sign. And thus, several years passed. He groaned from his heart. Interestingly, the same phrase that we saw last week, goneach milibo. He groans from his heart, right? This, again, rabbinic metaphor for crexing and fetching and falling apart. One day, while the old man was pouring off vinegar, the can burst. Whether he sold any more vinegar, I never knew. But I heard that he went to the image of that man. Now this is interesting. Agnon, the narrator, inserts himself here. Whether Agnon is the narrator or the narrator is someone else is unimportant. But we imagine Agnon, the narrator, inserting himself here into the story. But this is a story that took place generations ago. It's not something that he was witness to. There are stories that he relates as if he were witness to them, or maybe he actually really was witness to them. But this is a story of long ago, and he's the faithful narrator, right? He's the faithful narrator, and he's telling you, I don't know everything. Why does he tell you I don't know everything? Why does he tell you there's a detail of the story that I don't know? What does a narrator accomplish by doing that? Right, veracity, credibility. He's guaranteeing you that everything that he has told you, he knows for sure. Right? I'm not telling you what I don't know. Right? But what I'm telling you, this is the real story. But I heard that he went to the image of that man and took because the can breaks, so he knows it's time. It's a siman. It's a message. So he takes a stone to break open the charity box and take out his money out of his piggy bank. I also heard that on that same day, Roman priests, the translation here is a little clunky. In Hebrew, it's Kumarim Miromi, priests from Rome, right? Catholic priests wandering around Poland on their, they're like, I don't know, like Chabad shlichim. Pardon the expression. Pardon bad joke, right? So they're passing these priests. 3 priests are walking by. It's recorded. And found him standing over the charity box with a stone in his hand. They seized him and put him in prison. No sooner had they seized him and put him in prison than the whole town was seething like hell. Some said the world is going to dogs, and there is no more faith. A tradesman is but a product of his trade, for vinegar is none other than fermented wine. so has this old man showed himself to be wicked. Chometz ben Yayin. The other Jews in town are saying, this old Jew, his forefathers, they were wine merchants. They were all right. But he's gone sour. He's gone bad. Because look, what's he doing? He's breaking into the charity box of the church. Why are the Jews bothered by this idea that he's breaking into the charity box of the church? Yeah, so no doubt there's some high moral code here, but probably more immediately there's this fear of terrible retribution. One Jew's going to break into the church and steal money. It's bad for all the Jews. The former and the latter all shamed sighed ruefully at such a sacrilege, saying, "Oh, what an unworthy son born of a worthy father." Chometz ben Yayin. The old man sat in jail in irons, and it's a bad life. He goes to his trial. The judge asked him, "Do you admit that you were about to open the charity box?" The old man replied, "I was about to open the box because the money, ... Before he could finish what he was saying, the judge said to him reproachfully, "Does the accused admit that he wanted to open the box?" The old man wanted to explain to him that whatever he had done lawfully, since the money in the box was his, and a man can't be guilty of stealing his own money. He's so completely naive. The whole scene, this really is Kafkaesque, right? The whole trial is absurd because he does not fathom what he is on trial for. It's his money. So they say, "Were you going to take that money?" He says, "Of course." It's almost like Abbott and Costello, right? Who's on first? Yes, exactly, precisely, certainly. Were you going to take the money? Certainly. Of course I was going to take the money. It's my money. So you admit it. Yeah, it's my money. Give me back my money. But the presumption is that in that jurisdiction was that the more one spoke the truth, the more he was deemed to be lying. The judge called the witnesses. So these priests come forward and they testify that, they had seen him taking the money. He shook his hands and the chains rattled, making a loud noise. The judge returned to him and said, "Are you inferring that these high-ranking witnesses have perjured against you?" Chas v'shalom, God forbid. It had never occurred to the old man to say that they were lying. In fact, they were telling the truth. It was true that he was about to open the box. And what did this judge see to indicate that he was lying? But he would not lie. All he wanted was his money back. He was chained hand and foot with chains of iron, and he was incriminated out of his own mouth. But he was still well served by his eyes, which he raised and looked into the judges' and witnesses' faces. A weird state of affairs. All speak the truth, and the truth gives rise to a miscarriage of justice. In the Hebrew, it's even more poignant. Masek shafim, he says. Witchcraft. There's something afoul here. Hakol medabrim et ha'emet, v'ha'emet eina mevi'ah lahotzi din emet. Everyone's speaking the truth, but yet the truth doesn't put forth the true verdict. With one eye in his chains, the old man looked up with his other eye about their heads. He saw the image of that man on the wall of the courtroom. There's a picture of none other than that man, of Jesus, hanging in the courtroom wall. And said to himself, "You smile at me? You looking at me?" Right, looking down above imagine there's the judge up on the podium, up on the stand. Above him is a picture of Jesus looking down in order to, ensure that all the witnesses are telling the truth, the whole truth, nothing but the truth. And the man looks up at this. He doesn't know who it is. All he knows, this is the guy that was holding his money. This is the guy whose statue where he held his money. He says, "You smiling at me?" He began rapping on the table with both hands until the sound of his chain was heard from one end of the building to the other, and cried out, these are all rabbinic metaphors, "Leave me alone and give me back my money." But they beat him and put him back in jail. The old man sat on the straw and complained, bacha in Hebrew. He cried, "Oh God, it was plain for you to see how many years I have to contend with this exile. I didn't eat food, I wore no fine clothes, I occupied no fine lodgings. All my years were sour to me as vinegar, and I accepted it all lovingly, solely because I was to go up to your holy land. And now that my time has come to go up, my captors have come and taken my money and put me in jail. So he sat and cried until he dozed off in the middle of his crying. Right? And now, in one final paragraph, the whole story comes to an end. It's a story. It's a short story, but it has a long build-up. There are three parts to the story. One is the exposition, telling you who he was and what he does and what his plan is, and etc. And then there's the trial, which is much shorter than the first part. And now the final act, which is shorter even still. Agnon often did this, that he held the punch to the end, and then he knocks it home. Long exposition, and then think of, remember we read before Rosh Hashanah Yom Kippur, we read Etzel Chemdat, in Hebrew called Chemdat, the story of the guy that loves it, goes around eating, the Chazan on Erev Yom Kippur goes around eating, the story that goes on for page after page, almost as if Agnon couldn't help himself. And he probably had another 10 pages that he wanted to write, but knew the reader wouldn't have wouldn't have the strength for, wouldn't have the appetite for, right? But he strains the reader's attention almost to the breaking point, and then the denouement of the story, the resolution of the story comes very, very quickly at the end. Think even to a lesser degree, but in a similar way, think of Tehillah. There's this long build-up as the narrator unravels the story of Tehillah, and then having done so, after having written the letter to Shraga, the whole thing comes, to a very, very, very quick end. This seems to have been, the manner in which Agnon constructed many of his stories. At midnight, he wakes up of his own accord. In the room in the jail, there was no mezuzah and no can. He began shaking his chains and chanting in a sad voice some songs and praises which he was used to singing at night. And so he went on chanting until he fell asleep again. The jail door opened, and there appeared some apparition of a man with a stone box in his hand and a certain smile on his lips. So we're led to believe that this apparition that shows up in the jail cell, is the same. In other words, he's made 3 appearances now in the picture with a smile. Here's the smile, and the charity box in his hands. Now, what is this? The old man, the vinegar maker, he sees him. What does he think that he's seeing? Does he think he's seeing a statue that's come to life? Is it a picture does he think it's a ghost? It's not at all clear. It's not at all clear. The old man turns his eyes away from him and tried to fall asleep. That man put him on his feet and said, "Hold on to me, and I will bring you to wherever you wish to go." The old man extended his arms towards that man and said, "How shall I hold on to you when my hands are in chains of iron?" And the latter replied, "Afal pikein, nevertheless, therefore, thereof you shall." The old man opened wide his palms of his hand and clasped them about the neck of that man who smiled and said, "I shall promptly bring you to the land of Israel." Now, interestingly, it's like, like Aladdin, you have 3 wishes, right? You have 3 wishes. I'll grab onto me and I'll take you wherever you want to go. And if he would have said Bermuda, they'd be in Bermuda. The old man never specifies where he wants to go. He's just incredulous about the whole thing. He says, "Are you sure? How am I going to hold on to you really good if I got these chains around my arms?" And that man says, "I'll bring you to the land of Israel." So it comes time, like now, here it is, right? He's got his one passage through the cave, right? But this is instead, a magic flight, on the back of, like Superman, but instead of Superman, he's a stone statue. What? On the wings of, I don't know about angels, but on the wings of something. On the wings of a statue of Jesus. And there's some hesitancy here. Why might he be hesitant? Besides the fact all these little sugar. What? No, we know he doesn't know what this is about the statues, but here there's something magical going on. He knows there's something magical going on. This statue has somehow come alive. It passes through the bars of the of the prison cell. He says, grab onto me and I'll magically transport you to wherever you want to go. We'll have a miracle. And does he say, Jerusalem, on the double? No, he doesn't say anything. Oh, maybe. That's what Tehillah here is saying, because he got in trouble because of the statue. Maybe. But maybe it's also maybe he's delirious in captivity. But what does he know? What's he going to Israel for? To die. To die. It's like that joke. There's an old, I'm sure in Yiddish it's much better, but since I don't speak Yiddish, I'll say it in English. There's an old, it's a joke, it's a story, it's a folktale. It's something out of a Shalom Aleichem story or whatever. Agnon could have written it, but he didn't. There's this old schlepper who's, he's worn out. His job is he goes out to the forest every day, and with his creaking knees, he bends over and he picks up a little twig, and he puts it in a peckle in his back until the peckle is full, and he goes into town and he sells these twigs for kindling wood. And every time he bends down with his arthritic hands and his arthritic knees to pick up a twig from the ground and put it in the peckle in his back, he cries out, Malach HaMoves, angel of death, why don't you come already and take me? All day long he's saying, Malach HaMoves, why don't you just come and be done with me already? Angel of death, why don't you just put me out of my misery already? Every day each cracks, he's bending down and picking it up and he's putting it in his back. Finally, his pack is almost full. It's time to go back into town. He puts the last twig in, but the seam of the bag rips open and all 1,000 twigs fall out and scatter all over the ground, and he screams out, Malach HaMoves, enough already! And he opens his eyes, and who's standing in front of him but the Grim Reaper? Like in the cartoons with the sieve in hand and the black, who knows what he looks like. And Malach HaMoves, the angel of death, says to him, you called for me? And the old Jew looks around, he looks at his sticks, he looks at the Malach HaMoves, and he says, you mind giving me a hand at picking up these twigs? You can, when it comes time to it, when you're facing the Grim Reaper, he says, I want to go up to Eretz Yisrael to be buried, I want to go up to Eretz Yisrael to be buried, I want to go up to Eretz Yisrael to be buried tomorrow, right? I want a little more money. How much? Just a little more, right? I'll come back to these comments in a second. The old man embraced the neck of that man as the latter turned and faced the direction of Jerusalem. On their first flight, the man stopped smiling. On the second flight, the old man's fingers turned cold. On the third flight, he felt that he was embracing nothing more than cold stone. So this apparition reverts to its original form. It goes back to being a statue. So if you're flying through the air on the back of this thing, it's probably not so good for it to be a stone statue. His heart melted and his hands waxed weak. He was set loose and fell to the ground. On the morrow, when his captors came in, he was not to be found. So it's not a figment of the imagination, because really he's not there in the jail cell. That night, a knocking was heard on the door of the kollel in Jerusalem. The kollel here is not what we call a kollel, like a yeshiva for older men. The kollel was the institution. It was like the communal institution that managed the affairs of the Jewish community in the Yishuv HaYashan, in the old settlement of the Jewish settlement in the land of Israel, which sets this story probably, in the 19th century. Right? It's like the communal organization. So that night, knocking was heard on the door of the kollel in Jerusalem. Those who went outdoors saw a flight of angels which had come from the exile bearing a mortal form, which that very night they took and buried. In keeping with a custom in Jerusalem, not to hold over the dead. So what's the story about? Yeah, Nikki. Yeah. 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 Well, where's the resurrection? Where's the resurrection? No, dead. He comes. No. There's no resurrection here. There's no resurrection here. He's dead. Yes. No. And in fact, he disappears from his place of death. No. So there is no doubt that when all of these people, wrote these articles in the newspapers saying, "Well, what's Agnon doing?" It's not just that there's a figure, that the figure of Jesus appears. The figure of Jesus appears in a couple of other stories of Agnon also. There's one passage in Simple Story. There's a story called, it's in the collection called the first kiss, and it's Hanishka Rishona. There are other places with the figure of Jesus, but never in any kind of sympathetic light. And right, so here not only is the figure of Jesus appearing, but he's appearing as the Redeemer. He's appearing as the Redeemer. So when these people attacked Agnon, they had on what to rely. So when Agnon says, no, it's a story about the Balfour Declaration. So when people said Agnon might have just been making that up, but if that's the case, so then what is he really trying to say with the story? It's the statue that turns into stone. I'm not sure. I'm not sure that the statue is to blame. People here commenting what someone here in the room said, that the statue is trying to make up. He's trying to do a good deed for having. The statue wasn't at fault. The old man was very naive. He's at worst a fool, at best very, 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 very naive. It's not the statue's fault that he was putting the money there. It's not the statue's fault. That's a good question. That's a good question. How come all those years, nobody emptied out? How come all those years nobody emptied out the charity box? Well, they may have. They may have been constantly emptying it out every month. He just didn't know. He was. That's actually an interesting point. That's an interesting point. Maybe every month they emptied out the charity box. He's marking up the scratches, not knowing that every month it goes back down to zero, which actually, when we're going to unpack the symbolism here, might say something about Jewish-Christian relations and the kind of money we put into the bank of a certain relationship or a certain trust that maybe isn't accruing interest. When the can broke. Yeah. No, right, at the end it was getting filled up. Okay. Look, who knows how big it was? It's not so important for the purpose of the story, but why? If spiders were living there, I don't know. Right. Yeah. Yes, and Agnon was always trying to play with our minds in this regard. I don't know. It's harder to. The story still has to make sense on the level of the narrative. There are at least, yeah. Three is a tricky number here. 3 is a tricky number, particularly if you want to unpack all the Christian symbolism of the story. There might be another way to understand it. It's a story about everything falling apart. Everything in his life is falling apart. His house is falling apart. His talus is falling apart. His body is falling apart. His can is falling apart. But it's all going towards one one goal, which is, of course, getting to Israel. So even the statue, or the figure of the, pardon the expression here, the Redeemer in the story, he also falls apart. He also reverts back to nothingness. It's a statue, b'sachakol, right? I mean, all it is a statue, right? Remember, we're the religion that believes very strongly that statues really don't have any power. Now, there's no reference to this particular chapter in Psalms and Tehillim, but it might be an undertext here. I'm thinking of a chapter from Hallel. Atzabeim kesef v'zahav ma'aseh yedei adam. Pe lahem v'lo yidaberu, einayim lahem v'lo yira'u, af lahem v'lo yarichu, einayim lahem v'lo yira'u. It's a chapter in Tehillim in which David HaMelech, King David, is mocking the idols. They have ears, but they can't hear. They have eyes, but they can't see. They have noses, but they can't smell, etc., etc., etc. So this is a statue which does take on some kind of anthropomorphic something or other, but the cost of achieving the goal is even it falls apart. First it loses its smile, and then it goes cold, and then it's really nothing more than stone. So it's possible, this is one interpretation of the story, that the whole story is about this. The cost of the miracle is, it tends to wear you away. In which case, if the story really is making a statement about Zionism, well, it's a statement, it's actually very much in line with a lot of the things we talked about when we read In the Heart of the Seas. Remember, Herzl im Tirtzu Enzo Agada? If you really want it, it's not a dream, it's not a fantasy, it's not a fable, it's not fairy tales. Right? But you have to want it. You have to have real. But if you're going to rely on the miraculous, remember, Bilvav Yamim is a story about two ways to get to Eretz Yisrael: the natural way and the miraculous way. And each comes at a cost. So maybe that's what's going on here. Arnold Band, Arnold Band is the great interpreter of Agnon in English. If you want to buy, I've mentioned this before, there's a volume called Nostalgia and Nightmare by Arnold Band, B-A-N-D. If somebody can put the link up to Amazon in the chat. I bought my copy. It's a book that came out I think it came out in 1970. It was written before Agnon died. It probably came out around the time Agnon died. It treats only the stories that were published in Agnon's life, but it's an encyclopedic treatment of everything Agnon up until that point. Of course, more was published after Agnon died than in his own lifetime, but in terms of the canon of the works that came out in his own lifetime, everything is treated there with synopses of, I think, almost every story and references to all the secondary literature and etc. It's among the best books written on Agnon, even though it happens not to have been written in Hebrew. Interestingly, it was never translated into Hebrew. It's a book called Nostalgia and Nightmare by Arnold Band. He's still alive. He was a professor at UC Berkeley, I think. I bought mine used on Amazon for like $1 or something like that. So Band says, look, this is all a social satire. The question is, what is it satirizing? So either, if we take Agnon at his word, that's a statement about Zionism, about the Balfour Declaration. What was the Balfour Declaration? Balfour Declaration. But it was this promise by the non-Jews that they were going to deign to give us our share of the land of Israel. And we reacted like it was God's gift. Now, of course, I mean, those of us, I can't speak for all of us, I can only speak for myself, my own religious worldview, but we do believe that the Jewish return to the land of Israel and the return of sovereignty to the land of Israel through whatever agency is God's gift and is a sign of a step towards redemption, at least a step in the right direction. Rav Kook, of course, spoke famously on these matters. Rav Kook, of course, was a very, very important influence on Agnon. But Agnon is saying here possibly that the reliance of political Zionism, of secular Zionism, on the goodness and the rationality of the nations of the world, of the non-Jewish powers, is very naive. Because the Balfour Declaration promised us the land of Israel, and what happened? It didn't really work out exactly that way. I mean, ultimately we got it. 31 years later, there was Yom HaAtzmaut, but we had a fight of war in between, and the British weren't always so helpful, and this idea that they looked with favor didn't. There had to be a Shoah in between, and you'll remember that really poignant scene at the Kotel in Tehillah. Remember Tehillah? She goes down to the Kotel. The narrator goes down to the Kotel. It's when he encounters Tehillah a second time, and she tells him that the Rebbitzin now really is sick, and there's that scene with the British policeman that comes and knocks the old woman off the stool because you weren't in those days, because there was a lot of tension at the Kotel. Jews weren't allowed to really daven there in an organized way. You couldn't bring a seat or a bench or a stool or a chair to sit on because they didn't want it to turn into a permanent place of Jewish prayer. And the British policeman comes and knocks the stool out, and Tehillah just gives him one glance, and the moral power that she exerts, he realizes, that he's done something wrong, and he gives her back the thing. And the narrator, i.e. Agnon, says to Tehillah, "See, you're more powerful than all the British crown, because the British, they promise the Balfour Declaration." Remember, Tehillah's written at the end. I mean, Tehillah is set. The story is set at the end of the second half of the 20s, right? Probably around 1925. This scene probably takes place in the fall of 1925, right? So it's around the same time as you see the Balfour Declaration promises, and it's worth nothing. But one look from you, and you're more powerful. So that idea, there was a lot of disappointment in this unfulfilled promise. So maybe it's a satire on this kind of naive reliance on the rationality. If only we'll state with force the truth of our claim, so they'll have to recognize the truth. They'll have to make the right decision. Well, the old man in the story finds out that doesn't work that way. He's saying, "It's my money," and it was his money. He was in the right, but he was so naive to put his trust, literally, in the wrong hands. In whose hands does he place his trust? In the hands of the Christians. In the hands of the Christians. But he didn't know that because he was so naive that he didn't realize that he was trusting in an agency that could not deliver, or that would not deliver. Or Ban says, Right. So it becomes a metaphor. Well, he wasn't thinking that he was giving his money away to charity. He thought it was just a piggy bank. Right. But in other words, it becomes a metaphor for in whose hands do you place your trust. Or, Ban suggests, maybe it's a metaphor for the naivete of the Jews who think that redemption can come about through the church, through Christianity. Now, he's writing this in 1923 in Germany, where Jews are assimilating, not knowing that it wasn't going to help them 10 years from now. where Jews are assimilating. If you've read the book, the really, really, really wonderful book by Amos Elon, The Pity of It All. The Pity of It All. Amos Elon has this book called The Pity of It All, which is a history of German Jewry, asking the question, how could it be that the most accomplished Jewish community in history, that Jews stood at the head of everything, theater and art and banking and finance and commerce and academia and medicine and literature and music and scholarship and across the board. They were the most integrated Jewish community in the host society, probably in history. And yet, almost in the blink of an eye, in historic terms, they're demonized, they're turned into dogs, and they're assassinated as such. It's an extraordinarily important book. Amos Elon, E-L-O-N, The Pity of It All. So this is what Agnon's saying, and he's saying in 1923, right? That there's this naivete, that this idea that that we can assimilate into Christian society, and it will save us from our problems. So if either according to the first interpretation or the second interpretation, the nafkamina, the practical difference is what the symbols in the story then mean. In other words, if it's the first, if it's a statement about political secular Zionism and its naive trust in England or in the nations of the world to solve our problems and to redeem us, so then the trip to Eretz Yisrael is a literal trip. Right? Either they will bring us to the land of Israel or they won't bring us to the land of Israel. If it's more on the question of Jewish assimilation, so then it becomes metaphorical. The land of Israel as a metaphor for the promised land, for the redeemed land, from being removed from a state of our suffering, of our downtroddenness. The irony, of course, is that he only achieves it in death. Either way. And he ends up dead. And he ends up dead in Israel, right? So that the flaw, the tragic flaw, I won't say sin, because the old man, he's not a sinner, but he's a tragic figure, which means he has a tragic flaw. So his tragic flaw is his desire to want to die in Israel instead of wanting to live. And with all of the challenges, what we discussed last week, the challenges of having to struggle to build a society and to create a world here and to revive Jewish life and Jewish culture and Jewish learning and etc. So the irony, of course, is that his punishment and his desire are the same. He dies, he ends up dead in the land of Israel. So whatever it is, it's a critique on this, on this kind of mentality of the Jew in the diaspora who scratches and plans, hoping one day to come, and on this idea that, like we say in Birkat Hamazon, Hu yolichenu kumimiyut liartzenu. We ask that God should bring. I mean, it's no doubt it was a prayer that was formulated outside of Israel, which even we Jews today in Israel continue to recite. Maybe if we're not reciting for ourselves, we're reciting it for those that are still abroad, that God should bring us kumimiyut, upright, to the land of Israel, as opposed to in a box on our backs. I always feel a little ambivalent. I'm sitting here in front of an audience here in Jerusalem, almost all of whom are Jews that began in the diaspora and have made their way here for good or for long visits. And of course, I'm cognizant of the fact that many of you folks online are not, and I don't mean to make you feel bad or not too bad. But this seems to be part of what Agnon was saying. Well, in other words, the story was controversial because people wrote all of these, short essays and articles and letters to the editor and things saying, what's Agnon doing writing this story in which the hero, meaning the one in the end who gets the job done, is none other than a stand-in for Jesus. So much so that there were interpretations of the story that tried to show that's not Jesus in the end, but it is actually none other than Eliyahu Hanavi, Elijah the prophet, and the angels. No, in the end it's the angels that bring him because the statue or the apparition drops him along the way, right? But there's no doubt that, correct, the statue is not the one that brings him in. It's the angels that ultimately bring him across the border. But there's this response to the critics who tried to show, based upon not unconvincing textual references, that this is really talking about Eliyahu Hanavi, Elijah the prophet, who's always this kind of stand-in character to come in and save the day, to swoop in and solve the Deus ex machina, to come in and save the day. There's an interesting idea that's pointed out by Dov Sadan. Dov Sadan was a very interesting character. He was also a Gotzianer. He was Agnon's secretary for a while. He was a literary critic. He taught in the university, and he was for a short time also a member of Knesset. He has a book called Ke'erat Simukim, A Plate of Raisins, which is an anthology of Jewish humor. Not so much an anthology, but a catalog. In the study of folklore, they have such things, these catalogs of motifs. Like, so if you're studying folklore, you can go to the university and get these encyclopedias of folklore, and you can find, goats in folklore. And you'll find that there's these, 25 different variations of the role a goat will play in a folkloric story. One of them will be very similar to what we saw last week. Not just in Jewish folklore. There's other work that's done, encyclopedias with Jewish folklore. So Sadan did this. It's kind of like an anthology of Jewish humoristic folklore. And he identifies, the origins of this genre of story, but which shows that Agnon took the genre and flipped it on its head for its own purposes. So just really quickly, here's the story. Maaseh Yehudi Uman. There's a certain Jewish craftsman who had to do a certain task. He was a carpenter. He had to do something in a Dominican church. He sees a statue he sees Jesus on the cross with the pegs stuck in his feet, and the pegs are made out of gold, right? This is a statue of Jesus, and the nails that are nailed into Jesus' hands and feet are actually made out of gold. And he sees a statue of Mary, mother of Jesus, with a gold halo. So this Jewish craftsman comes and he steals the gold pegs and the gold halo. And when the church fathers come along, they complain. So he says, "Maaseh shehaya kachaya." This is what happened. I was standing here doing my work, and suddenly I hear this sigh crying out. He hears Mary crying out. And she's saying, "Help my son. He's stuck up there with those nails in his hands and his feet. Do me a favor. Help him out. Take the nails out. You can keep them for yourself." He does it. As a reward, she gives him her own gold halo. So now the church is stuck. Because if they say to him, "What are you talking about?" It's just a statue. So they're admitting that they worship Maaseh Yedei Adam, right? Nothing more than. So they're stuck. So the priest says to them, "You got me. I'm going to have to let you keep these gold accoutrements because you know, the implication being, you and I both know that you're a ganef, right? But you're a clever ganef. And I can't admit that this ridiculous cockamamie story that you made up isn't true. Because if I do, I'm saying something bad about my own faith. It's a genre of Jewish humor. So Sadat says this is the basis in folklore of this story, which Agnon takes and flips on its head. The moral of the story is a different pasuk in Tehillim. However you interpret the story, there's a different pasuk in Tehillim, in Hallel, Lo hametim yehallelujah. The dead cannot praise God. And Judaism is not a religion. You look, for many people who have only a very tangential connection to Judaism. So Judaism is something that comes into your life, you know, when somebody dies and the rabbi comes to the funeral. So Judaism becomes a religion that's very much connected to death because it's the only time it makes an appearance in your life. But in fact, Judaism is not a religion which is into death. It's a religion which is into life. It's a religion which says, you know what, in life we have a lot of really interesting challenges. You Jews, you want to return to the land of Israel and build a society? Go ahead. It'll be a gift from the United Nations, from God himself, who knows. But whatever it is, it's a challenge. And the challenge of creating a meaningful society here is actually the subject of next week's story. Last week we saw the tensions between Poland and Eretz Yisrael, getting from one to the other, and this tricky, the magic cave that connects and also disconnects between the two, and the cost to each side of that equation. Today we saw the political complications in Jewish-Christian relations and what it means for how Jews in the diaspora think and get and plan to get to Eretz Yisrael. Next week, we'll leave the diaspora behind and we'll figure out how we manage to mess ourselves up once we finally get here, and about divisions that exist when Agnon wrote the story. And unfortunately, if any of you have had access to a newspaper anytime in the last 4, 5, 6 months, unfortunately also exists today, the kind of division within Jewish society that has to be overcome if we're going to accomplish something here in the land of Israel. I'm going to just